Go.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning into today's webinar. I'm David Adler, the chairman and founder of BizBash, and I'm thrilled to introduce today's presenter, McNeel Keenan of Cvent. McNeel has been with Cvent for 13 years and is currently the vice president of product management, and in this role, he oversees over 200 people in their development teams focused on delivering all of Cvent's mobile products, enabling event organizers to execute, engage, and gain insights into the attendees during events. And today, McNeel will share his insights into creating memorable hybrid experiences. But before we get started today, we have a few housekeeping notes. Number one, be sure to tweet your webinar feedback with the hashtag #SmarterEvents to @BizBashLive and @Cvent. And we'll also be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions in the Q&A tab in the chat window on the right. And at the conclusion of the webinar, the presentation will be available on demand, so you will not miss one thing. You can tell all your friends about it. So you can go back and check that everything that we discussed today is documented. So without further ado, let me introduce McNeel Keenan.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. David, thanks so much for the kind introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll kick this thing in motion here. All right. So now that I already had an introduction, I guess I can just go ahead and fire it right up. So today we're going to be talking about hybrid events. And, I kind of come from the product side. David's going to join me for Q&A at the end. I'm sure he's got a lot of good insights as well, but mainly we're going to look to take your questions from today's webinar. We've got a lot of you joining, so we're excited to see the questions that you guys bring to the table. We should have a good 15 to 20 plus minutes at the end. So we've got the Q&A, so I'll be kind of monitoring that as well. So Raphael already asked about our virtual backgrounds. I'm using a real background. I think David was using a virtual one, but you do have so many different options in this virtual world. So Raphael, congratulations. You are our first Q&A to flow through here today. So let's look a little bit at today's agenda. So we'll start with the opportunity that hybrid events really kind of pose to us. Now, we'll take that and we'll look at actually defining it, what hybrid is and isn't, what are some use cases, different goals that you may have, and then we'll start plotting out a bit of a how-to, looking across the 4 different pillars of the virtual experience. And then at the very end, instead of just looking at a single event, we'll try and map it across what would hybrid mean to your total event program. So with that said, we'll dive in. So, when you think about the opportunity that hybrid poses, I think everyone's known of hybrid. It's something we've thought about, but I think the way that we've shifted to virtual has certainly shifted everyone's thinking. I think we've realized, hey, we've considered it in the past. Maybe it was too expensive. Maybe we weren't sure if anyone was going to attend. Maybe it might cannibalize the in-person experience, so we don't want to go too far. But I think this whole world has really discovered this virtual channel as an opportunity to activate a wider audience. Now, it's not just that it's an opportunity. There's also just the realities of the path forward. As we look into the path back to in-person events, hybrid is going to be the only reality for some people in your audience, whether that's because of health and safety concerns, or just the fact that their corporate travel budgets have been greatly reduced, if not eliminated entirely through 2020, and who knows what 2021 will look like. Or even you may be constrained in partnership with your venues, and that a lot of venues you're not permitting events over a certain size just because they don't think that they can help planners execute a safe event. And so there will be almost a forcing function to say, hey, if you want to reach the same size audience as you did in 2019, it's going to have to be through hybrid, as we start to kind of enter that new normal. Now, there's been some companies, and forgive a little bit of the old data here, but if I just love this example, there have been companies that have tapped into the hybrid event opportunity early and saw returns greatly, right? So the example, very large event, SAP's Sapphire Now, In 2013, they had 20,000 in-person attendees with another 80,000 virtually. And they expanded that even rapidly just 2 years later from 20,000 to another, I believe it was 150,000 virtual attendees. And so just look at the size of the platform and the reach this one event can have by adding in that hybrid component. And when I say hybrid, I know I don't want to assume that everyone knows what I'm talking about here. I mean a virtual component. So a component that is available for your audience that's not able to join you face to face. Now, not only is it going to help you include more people, whether that's just for pure accessibility reasons, affordability reasons, health and safety reasons, but it's also going to help you provide a more green and sustainable footprint. Less people traveling, less people, on airplanes or in cars to get to your event, and so you're able to access those people without the same amount of environmental costs as well. But, it's not just going to be the reach of the audience. Think of what you're building as a platform. And this is a platform that if you can go out to your sponsors and exhibitors, it's a platform that ultimately these sponsors are going to want to tap into in an even greater way. Imagine you're selling sponsorships at SAP's Sapphire now. And if you had to say, yep, our audience on site is 20,000 people, and that's all it is. Now, that's a lot of people. But it's such a bigger platform when it's not just 20,000 people in person, but it's another 150,000+ attending virtually. So with that bigger platform that you're building, that bigger audience, that bigger reach, it's not just your direct opportunity to have that exposure to the audience. It's also a bigger opportunity for your sponsors. And so just think of this as a platform that you're building, an audience, a community, a source of content, a source of engagement that, if successful, is going to allow you to increase your sponsor relationships as well. Now, if we go in and define hybrid events, we look at a lot of different use cases for virtual. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking about this, in that really no type of event has been untouched by virtual. So everything from small meetings to webinars on up to your full-blown virtual conferences, where a virtual conference is not just a single presentation. It's going to have, maybe multiple presentations, maybe multiple streams or tracks of presentations, along with a sponsorship component, a virtual exhibition, if you will. And typically there's going to be a whole mix of virtual content interactions that you can provide with those virtual conferences. But then when we look at the world of hybrid, there's going to be, of course, these internal hybrid events and your external hybrid events, like user conferences, industry conferences, where there is going to be a set of shared content, likely your speakers, the panelists on the stage, or some of your stages. But I think what we're going to find is it's definitely going to be two unique experiences, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. Now, one of the goals of a hybrid event is to, first and foremost, reduce the barriers to entry. So it's not to necessarily cannibalize your on-site experience, but instead make it easier to get started, right? If the barriers to entry is, a $4,000 expenditure between ticket, hotel, time out of office, flight, that's a pretty big introductory cost to get people into your events community. And so if hybrid is a starter to get people excited or knowledgeable of the fact that your event's going on, that can be a great goal to set as, hey, our number one goal, reduce barriers to entry to our platform. Second, we've talked about a more accessible attendance option as well. Talked about the ways to connect to that larger audience. And ultimately, a key goal is no matter where your audience member is going to be, whether they're at home or in person, they need to feel that they're going to get a high value experience, right? They're not going to get a second tier experience for not being there in person. Now, what hybrid is not, is it's not just setting up a camera in a ballroom, right? Wide angle lens, connecting it to the internet and say, great, everyone can see it. Ultimately it is going to be one event, but it's two experiences. It's the experience of the people that are on site and those at home. We'll use the example of live sports quite a bit today. but it's a great way to look at it, right? The experience of those in a stadium is quite different than those at home, but still equally powerful, no doubt. So that's a little bit of just kind of setting it up. Now let's start to map out a little bit of the how-to here. So some common challenges and pitfalls. First, I'll call it the peanut butter spread approach, in that you take the same approach as you do for in-person as you do for your virtual attendees. And that applies to every different stage of the life cycle of an event, both before, during, and after. Ultimately, that can kind of leave the virtual audience feeling quite a bit isolated. Hey, I'm not in there in the room, so I'm not able to share in that experience. And so, the peanut butter spread of, hey, it's basically just an extended on-site experience, isn't going to deliver to that first goal, which is deliver a valuable experience to both audiences. Another common challenge or pitfall is just being able to make the business case for hybrid expansion. As you're going to see today, we'll talk, it's going to require a real investment to deliver that hybrid component to your event, no doubt. But ultimately, the business case can be made to say, hey, this bigger platform, look at the vision, and this is where we're going to go. And so hopefully today you'll get some ideas for how to make the business case for that hybrid expansion. Now, production is going to become a bigger element. You're going to have to transform from event planner. Of course, you're going to have to keep that, but also start to think of yourself as not just an event planner, but also an event broadcaster, right? You're really producing a broadcast to that at-home audience. You're going to have to navigate some of the common pitfalls of virtual experiences, from event length and session length and different time zones of where your attendees are going to be logging in from. You're not going to have everybody in one place. And so there's going to be some common challenges that you'll have to address there. And then, can you leverage this newfound scale, newfound reach, and turn that into additional sponsor ROI? And so you're going to have to kind of not just think about the on-site sponsorship opportunities, but are there new sponsorship opportunities for this new virtual audience? So the way we break it down, we're thinking about execution here. Really, there's 4 key pillars. So we look at any virtual event experience, which introducing hybrid really is that. We break it down these 4 ways, right? Content, community, sponsorship, and analytics. And so today we'll kind of walk through each sense and think about how we can create or execute at a high level across these 4 key pillars. So first, let's talk about content. I think one of the greatest examples that we can all take inspiration from as event planners is sports, in that a lot of us have leveraged the power of live experiences in our face-to-face engagements, small events, the large events. And there's been other groups that are a great example of leveraging the power of live, and that's sports. So here I'll use the example of the NFL, where the NFL has taken a in-person experience and greatly expanded their platform by creating a unique and tailored experience for the audience at home. The audience at home doesn't have the same experience of that in the stadium, and that the audience at home is interacting with the producers in the booth, the sideline reporters, the Goodyear event, the Goodyear blimp views, the pre-recorded content interviews, the halftime shows. And by introducing a totally tailored experience to the audience at home, the NFL is able to grow their platform into almost a national identity to some extent, to an international powerhouse. And so that's what you're going to need to be thinking about, right? Is shifting that idea of moving to an event producer mentality. It's one event, but 2 distinct experiences. Ultimately, when I think about some experiences I've had in life, I think of concerts as well. And when I would always go to a concert here in Washington, D.C. at the 930 Club, I always preferred to stand in the crowd, kind of on the ground floor versus in the balcony, because in the balcony, I always felt like I was watching someone else go to an event. And that always felt left out. It felt a degree removed. And when you ask, the people that are tuning in to a sporting event, whether it's anything from golf to football to whatever it may be, they don't feel like they're watching other people attend the event. They're having an experience themselves. So ultimately what it means is you've got someone there on site representing your virtual audience. So in the example of football, you've got those people in the booth that are talking directly to you at home and kind of guiding you through the experience, and they're physically there. So what this really means is you're going to need a whole nother set of roles that you may not have ever established before to actually execute and represent that audience at home. You're going to need to rethink maybe how you structure some of your content and plan your tracks, or even introducing different types of content as well. So now it's not just the session schedule, but can you produce content that maybe is only available to those at home? So you're starting to rethink who your team is. We're even hearing examples of people introducing entirely new planning positions on their team, and they're really only planning the virtual experience and not the in-house experience. So you're going to have people that they're actually speaking on camera or producing behind the scenes. You've got that idea of the booth in the studio. You've got this idea of video on demand content. Do you have an MC character that might help bridge the gap between the guy that speaks to the in-person audience and those at home? And then do you have the sideline reporter who can kind of be the man on the street, the person doing the interviews with those that are a part of the event on site? So when you think about the types of exclusive virtual content that you can offer, again, I like examples that we see in the broadcasting space, whether it's sports or late night television or news, where you've got people that might doing the play-by-play. So what's coming up next and kind of guiding me through, what's in the next 2 minutes, what's in the next 10, what's this afternoon, what's tomorrow. You've got the color commentary where people are prognosticating on what they might hear in the next presentation, or what they just heard from the CEO's presentation, or an industry thought leader or a celebrity. You have that man on the street that's kind of going through, and maybe it's on a trade show floor, maybe it's on the outside of a session, interviewing key people and seeing what they had to say about the presentation that they just saw, or the panel that they saw, or the show floor that you've created there on site. It might be just to send momentum to the keynote room, right? So you're starting to kind of think about what might happen, what might be presented, what might be announced. And so no better way to set up a keynote than to kind of start setting it up and send momentum to the keynote stage. And then think about interviews, right? You've assembled some of the industry's greatest experts, whether those are sponsors or there's industry thought leaders, or they're speakers that just presented or are about to speak. Being able to provide this interview content to the audience at home can be, again, a great way to differentiate the experience and offer a lot of unique value to that at-home audience. Now, you might have to also think about altering the agenda and ultimately to have success. So, the attendee span of someone at home is going to be quite different than someone that's traveled and has grabbed a seat in the room. Things tend to move at a much higher velocity when you're watching a broadcast. Think about, watching the news. You don't really stay on any one news story for more than 60, 90, 120 seconds. Now that might be a little short, but it keeps it moving a lot faster, where when you're on site, you're willing to take a little bit longer form, a little bit slower type of experience. And so you're gonna have to think about that virtual attendee attention span. Can you really ask someone to tune in for 8 hours? For a golf event, we don't tune in until the last group tees off at 2 p.m. because people aren't going to sit there and watch golf for more than about 4 hours max. So the same thing applies. You're going to have to curate that at-home agenda and think about how you might be able to kind of tailor it and make it succinct, to the point, a high velocity experience, so that it's not slow and plodding. Now, that also, the other consideration you're going to need to make is, what do you bring to your audience live versus on demand? There are pretty high costs to live producing every single session. And so if you've got 5, 10, 20 simultaneous tracks going on, to live produce every single room that you have could be very expensive very fast. So I think we've all realized that there's a lot of value in capturing our content, especially as we produce so many virtual events already in the last couple of months, that there is a lot of value in capturing it, but you are going to have to think about the difference between just capturing it and making it available on demand later versus capturing it live. And the cost of production are going to be a big consideration there. But also that first point, right? The format may not be as compelling to those at home for that 50-minute session. So you might want to limit how many of the direct replication or syndication sessions you do from the actual agenda for your on-site attendees. Okay, so we talked a lot about content. I want to think a little bit about community. And I think one of the things that makes the power of live so powerful is the fact that it's a shared experience. It's that that there's other people that are experiencing this at the exact same time as you versus on-demand videos or binge watching other Netflix shows. You don't get that sense of community. And so that's what really events can bring. And is there a way to tap into that even greater where people on site and people that are attending virtually, can they feel the power of that shared experience? And so, while we talked about needing to tailor two distinct ones, you can probably leverage the groundswell that, hey, there's something bigger going on here. Maybe you're bridging that gap with things like a mobile app for your on-site attendees and more desktop-driven technologies, or even through the TV for your virtual attendees. But what are the things where they can kind of collaborate on? Are those activity feeds, chats, polling, Q&A? How can you make sure everybody's kind of sharing in that, any kind of those audience engagement types of technology? So for example, Q&A, right? I may be attending virtually, watching this experience remotely, and I'm submitting questions and upvoting those questions, but the questions are coming in from both the audience that's sitting there in the room along with me at home. So the audience in the room is able to kind of engage through their mobile app. They're not necessarily having to fire up their laptop to get engaged with the greater community, but things like Q&A, polling, chat experiences, activity feeds, that's a great way to bridge that gap between those that are, again, in person and those that are viewing remotely. Now, there's also some different ways to not just think about content, but there's ways to build that sense of community, and it might be tailored at just your virtual attendees. So can you do things that connect that virtual audience with each other? Because it is going to be pretty hard to ask for somebody that's on site to connect with somebody that's not, right? They flew there for a reason, to connect with people face to face, and that's fine. But what about your virtual audience? Do you give them ways to connect? And one thing we've seen that's been really popular is this idea of collaborative virtual sessions. Think of these like roundtable discussions, right? Where you can get 50 people into a virtual room, break them out into, Zoom meetings has a great functionality called breakout rooms, where they can go down to 5, 6, 7 people, have a cool conversation, understand, each individual's unique perspectives, maybe share key takeaways with the broader group. And ultimately that provides a more organic way to network versus the more forced discovery questions and icebreaker questions. You're solving some topics together and then bringing that back to share key takeaways with the broader group. So again, you can think about not just one-way content, but also more collaborative and engaging experiences for that virtual audience. Now, on the sponsorship side, ultimately sponsors tend to be looking for value from your platform for two ways. One, it helps them build brand awareness, and two, they're expecting they're going to get some lead generation out of their engagement with this event. So, can you help your sponsors not just engage with those on site, but also those remotely? So can you introduce a concept like a virtual booth? Now, to be clear, this requires additional investment from your exhibitors, and that it's not going to be feasible to ask the on-site booth staff to interact with people that are not physically there, just for no other reason. It's loud on a trade show floor. People are busy, and it's tough for them to pay attention. So it would require additional engagement from your sponsors, to kind of have dedicated virtual booth staff that are kind of manning that booth remotely. you're thinking more and more about digital content and not just informational and how to get people to a physical booth. So video on demand, other types of collateral. Can you provide those video conferencing options so that you can have a video conference conversation versus just a chat-based one? And are there ways to actually capture leads? So what are the tools you're going to give so that real leads are generated even from that virtual audience? So is it that they can pre-schedule appointments? Can they just request to be contacted directly through this virtual booth? Or, is there a quick and easy way for that virtual booth staff to capture your contact information, when you're engaging over that video conference conversation? So certainly there's a parallel track here that you have to run if you want to introduce this idea of virtual booths for your exhibitors and sponsors to tap into your virtual audience. But if you think about how much bigger your platform's getting, this is a great way to think about it. Now, another way is sponsored sessions. So actually making your sponsors a part of your organic or native agenda for the event, so that not just getting signage, but also getting attendance lists. And so while the virtual audience didn't necessarily attend in person, they did attend remotely. And as long as you provided the right notice and captured the right opt-ins, then you can share that attendance list for that specific session to your sponsor directly. So we've seen this be a more and more common tactic with virtual events, is to introduce sponsors as to be a key piece of your actual official event schedule, and share the attendance list live with the sponsor so they can activate that additional data as well. Now, we're also thinking about expanding the ad platform. So, you are going to have a different technique and a different playbook around your approach to ads. Now you've got this whole remote audience that's viewing digitally. And so you're needing to think more like digital video platforms like YouTube. So here's the example with YouTube, but you're thinking about ad pre-rolls. You're thinking about more video types of ads. You're thinking about new types of calls to action. And you're even starting to think about, okay, well, what are things that broadcasters are doing? Well, a lot of that is things like product placements. So how can they organically weave in sponsor messages, sponsor content into the actual broadcast itself? So that might be interviewing the CEO of one of your top sponsors and broadcasting that interview to your entire virtual audience. It may be product placements that you have throughout the broadcast. You might even be able to take advantage of things like session waiting rooms. So people are starting to log in 5, 10, 20 minutes in advance. Think just like a movie theater does, 10 minutes before the movie is going to be playing. People are taking their seats, and you're starting to introduce, local ads and different spots. That could be another opportunity to monetize with this greater audience you have that's getting ready for the content to begin. And certainly with all the video on demand content that you can make available, you can integrate ads before or after or even during, maybe at the 30-second spot of a video on demand, a quick 10-second message shows up from a key sponsor, and then you can continue playing the video. So again, there's lots of ways people have been able to monetize digital content. And so we can take a lot of inspiration from platforms just like YouTube in how they're able to do it and map that out towards your event. But there's no doubt that the introduction of hybrid presents a wide range of expanded sponsor activation opportunities. So just to kind of orient you here, we've got two axes. On the axis of brand awareness to kind of hard lead generation of how your sponsors are going to be able to get value. And then from the in-person face-to-face engagements to your virtual engagements. If you didn't introduce the hybrid component, basically everything above this middle line here is not an opportunity for sponsor activation. You're not able to tap into that larger audience. So of course, the things we're familiar with in-person, like booth visits or appointments or lead retrieval capabilities, those are all well and good. But now, with the things we've just kind of talked about, with that expanded virtual audience, the new ways to engage that virtual audience with your sponsors, the opportunities are that much bigger. And of course, that can lead to greater monetization opportunities. Again, I'll map it back to live sports. If, sports were relegated just to in the stadium, you're probably only going to get some local sponsors and a total sponsor budget of a couple $1 million a year. Whereas look at college football or the NFL, right? The sponsorship opportunities and activations and the revenue that they're generating from the NFL is billions of dollars a year. And almost all of that is actually from the virtual audience and the expanded reach that it presents. So not just greater opportunities with sponsorship, but also with analytics, right? So you're going to need to think about how you instrument not just your on-site experience, but also your virtual experience, and that you're going to be able to understand which content is resonating for your audience, which content is not. And then hopefully you're uncovering key signals of intent for each different audience member. There's going to be a big difference between somebody that logs in for 10 minutes of a session and versus somebody that's actually binging on content for hours and hours and hours and engaging with speakers through Q&A and polling and filling out feedback surveys. So you're going to want to make sure that you've got the proper web analytics for all your digital properties, that you're actually tracking attendance, right, at your virtual sessions, and that you can even put a little bit more science behind it, actually doing things like a score. So you can score your each attendee's level of engagement so that who is my top 20% most engaged people, or who are my top 20% most engaged executives. These could be a great pool of evangelists that I want to activate post-event, even though they didn't potentially attend in person. So there's a lot of different activities like that you see kind of listed here that you can instrument that can be a key signal or a key indication of engagement and how engaged they are. And ultimately, you're not going to waste your sales team's time or even your marketing team's time following up people that aren't engaged and letting them focused on the highest priority customers, prospects, and opportunities. So, a lot of different ideas there around, how to execute a hybrid experience between content, community, sponsorship, and analytics. But let's take a quick step back and think about, okay, well, is hybrid possible for every event in my program? Or are we just talking about, my most important marquee annual event? And I think ultimately hybrid is viable for all types of events. To some extent, there's been a democratization of the technology. It doesn't require massive six-figure budgets to produce any kind of hybrid experience. I know that when I'm seeing coverage of protests and things like that that are going on, and we see reporters out in the field with nothing more than a Bluetooth microphone and an iPhone, and they're able to provide that type of experience from what's going on in the field and bringing that back to the booth without a satellite truck and a massive outlay of technology. So ultimately you need to think about how you build a digital engagement strategy across every different type of event, whether that's your tier 1 to your tier 3 events. I don't think that the virtual components are a fad. I think ultimately they're going to be here to stay. Now you're going to have to bear with me for this example. It's a little bit of a work in progress here, but you just think about the added reach you could get of, let's say in 2019, you had a 10,000 in-person event program. It might've been made up of, so 10,000 attendees across your tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 events. And what's the multiplier you can get by adding on a hybrid component, even for those small regional local events? So if you go from 5,000 in-person attendees for those tier 3 events, and you're able to double that exposure, okay, that's another 5,000 people in your audience. With the tier 2 events, maybe there's a more compelling draw, and you're able to not just get double your in-person audience, but actually kind of tripling your total audience. So, if you had 2,500 people in that tier 2 program across all the events through the year, you're getting another 5,000. And when you see the tier 1 events and introducing that hybrid component to it, we're definitely seeing multiplier effects that are greatly bigger. I mean, just look at the SAP example or all the examples we've seen from virtual events. We took a pretty conservative guess here in saying, oh, you might get 6 times more reach. So just the hybrid impact alone can take that in-person 10,000 event program to 35,000. You take that and pair it with a pure virtual expansion as well, with a whole new series of events. You can very realistically plot out a path where your live event program is now impacting 70,000 people instead of 10,000 that it was originally impacting. So I know it's a little bit of a reach here, but we're definitely looking for different data on how we're seeing people expand the reach. But this is kind of the idea of how you could plot out a business case for expanding into hybrid. Now we've also got a lot of resources for you as well. So at Cvent, of course, we love partnering with BizBash and being able to engage with you guys, through the BizBash network. We also have some other webinars with our CMO, Patrick Smith, coming up on June 25th, blogs, ebooks, trainings, and certifications. We're on pace to get to 100,000 people certified across all different Cvent's event management technologies at no cost. It's something we've done in 2020 with the COVID crisis and everything, as a way to keep people's skills sharp. Plus, we're embracing virtual as well, no doubt. We're really excited to be hosting Cvent Connect virtual August 25th and 26th. 7 different tracks of content, 5 great keynotes, ways to connect with your industry peers on the venue and destination side as well. So we're excited, and we will be running this on our next gen platform, which is going to be known as Cvent Engage. So you've seen a couple screenshots throughout, but we were mainly focused on more educational concepts today. But don't ask your sales rep about it yet. We haven't just announced it. So it's just a sneak peek of our new virtual experience and event app known as Cvent Engage. And at this point, I'll turn it over for questions.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I've got you, David.
Fantastic. Well, I am dying to hear what you are talking about in terms of you're the product guy, right? So you must be so excited about what you're about to come out with.
Yes, we are excited.
iPad or the new, I can't wait to see what's in your brain, because in order to create apps, you have to understand the process.
Exactly.
Was there anything when you investigated this that was a key learning that you knew you had to solve for before we go into other people's questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as we were starting to survey the landscape and seeing what was out there between webinar technologies, live streaming technologies, virtual conference technologies, and then just trying to understand what's missing in the market, how the whole market shifted around this shift to virtual, where virtual events have existed in the past, but they didn't necessarily see, it wasn't a whole growth area. And so we kind of boiled it into those 4 areas: content, community, sponsorship, and analytics. We said, if this is these are the concerns of our planners and the market, and they're saying, hey, if we want to do something more than just a webinar or more than just videos on a web page, how do we really make it an event, even though it's virtual? And so we kind of saw it as, if you can execute across those 4 pillars, that's going to be the secret to success and the way to differentiate your virtual event experience from all the others.
The one thing that I find in these webinars and virtual events and things like that is that the complexity is overwhelming as the attendee.
Right.
You deal with simplification and not throwing in the kitchen sink on these things.
I think it's a really good question. I think to some extent, there's been this draw like moths to the flame over these kind of 3D environments, and they are full featured, and sometimes they can appear familiar. So they're skeuomorphic in design, meaning they're a digital recreation of the on-site experience. But I think what you're highlighting is they can also be a little bit clumsy, and that you spend so much time trying to recreate an in-person experience, you're not actually able to take advantage of what the purely digital medium can offer. And so, I think that you're going to see a second generation of solutions hitting the market, now, and certainly Cvent's going to be introducing our own take on it, that tries to just embrace virtual for 100% what it is, and not necessarily just trying to recreate the in-person experience.
Have you figured out the essence of it, of what this, I'm talking to you on a one-to-one relationship, and I don't have a million things going on my screen, so it's easier. How do you, what is the takeaway for the person sitting at home in their virtual hybrid environment? Is it the storytelling that's the key? Is it the glitz and glamour that's the key? Is it the networking that's the key? Why are we sitting here listening to you? Us. Why are they us?
Well, certainly people have a little bit more time on their hands, but I think that I think if you go back to the broadcaster world and you see that the people do engage with digital content, whether it's on demand like through Netflix or more of a true broadcast, people do respond differently in person than virtual. So the attention span is shorter. The velocity of the content, I think, has to move a lot faster. So you can't have the showmanship of being on a stage. I don't know if you watched Tim Cook's WWDC presentation yesterday. It moved very fast, even faster than they usually do when they're presenting on a stage. And I think that's kind of a little bit of an expectation is I know what's coming up next, and it's coming up in 60 seconds or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So it just moves faster. But yeah, I think people still want to tap into the community elements as well. So there is going to be a difference between an event and a presentation. And so making it as interactive as possible, speakers to audience or just audience members connecting with each other, there's definitely been some innovation in that space, no doubt.
Should we be going for the audio? Like I noticed on our chat, there's a lot of side conversations going on and all of this. When you do a hybrid, is the intimacy more important than the spectacle?
I think
it's an interesting sort of way to think about this.
Right. I think people are always going to multitask. It's a little bit harder when you're engaged in a conversation. But I think a challenge for planners is maybe embracing that multitasking nature and giving ways for people to do it all within your experience, and not just, you're going to have to go and do other things elsewhere. So whether it's additional content people to engage with or chatting with the attendees on the side while they're listening to a presentation, people like to discuss what they're hearing live. And so if you can embrace that multitasking nature, it's not a bad word for people to be distracted, but distract them with your own additional experiences.
All the distractions. When you say attention span, where are you in the attention span of an attendee now? Is a keynote 15 minutes? Is a keynote 45 minutes? Is it 15 seconds like in TikTok, or like where are we?
Yeah, I don't know that it necessarily has to be mapped to the traditional session, but I think it's within the session, it's about making sure that you provide change and dynamism every no more than 5 to 7 minutes.
5 to 7 minutes. That's the number.
It doesn't mean your sessions need to be 5 to 7 minutes and you have an agenda that looks like it has 75 things on it. But it's making sure you're changing the dynamic. It may be a speaker change. It may be a change between, a screen share to taking audience questions, to storytelling, to on-demand video content, and switching to something that maybe was pre-recorded. And I think that's what keeps people engaged.
How about slides? Like death by PowerPoint. This is what keeps coming to mind with Zoom going, that eventually we're going to be so sick of it that at what point, is it one word on a slide? Some people say that. Is it, a whole big diagram? Like different for every occasion. But like,
so a couple of thoughts there, right? So one, I think this whole world of Zoom fatigue is real, but it has changed just the basics. You expect to see your speakers now. The voice over the PowerPoint is
dead.
Quickly executed. It's now done. But I also think that the Zoom fatigue is real, and then it's going to require everyone to start thinking a little more like a broadcaster as well. And that's not just up to the presenter. It means you need to start experimenting with different speaker layouts that are evolving throughout the presentation, different graphic overlays, different transitions between VOD and live. that's going to help spice it up versus saying this more one-dimensional speaker on the right, presentation on the left, even if you're seeing your speaker. And the cool thing is there's a lot of tools emerging on the market that make that a possibility without a $10,000 piece of hardware. Pure web-based technologies for live streaming that lets you kind of act like a producer. And so, we could make quick switches. So if you want to see me and David side by side or bring in another speaker, that can add a lot of dynamism. That doesn't necessarily mean you're just talking about, different formatting of your PowerPoint presentations.
How many years do we have between the time that the people that are playing games now are expecting these hybrid experiences to be super cool? And so the new generation that's about to come up in about 2 seconds is going to feel like we're a bunch of like granddads here.
I feel like we saw the early pieces of that with HQ Trivia, where everyone logged in for this 7 to 10 minute game, and it became this somewhat short-lived national phenomenon. But effectively, for those of you who don't know what HQ Trivia was, it had a host on a live stream, and just basically 8 questions. I think it was 8, maybe it was 7 questions would appear, and you had 5 seconds to answer the question. And eventually it would just eliminate audience members until maybe 1,000 people were left that had answered all 8 questions correct, and they won a prize. But to me, that showed a lot of innovation, not just kind of around the live stream, and actually integrated into the core experience. So that was showing up and being an engaging piece. So it'll be interesting to see how people incorporate more and more of those elements. I kind of think of it as innovating inside the box, like inside the live stream box, and not just around it. So it definitely can take some inspiration from HQ Trivia. I don't have any suggestions on technologies just yet, but there is going to be some things that make that evolution kind of come there. Even AR is kind of interesting. Like Snapchat had a really interesting virtual conference for their partner summit recently. It's worth checking out, just even if you're not interested in their content, just to see how they did the event, where the speakers were speaking on an augmented reality stage by a beach. Nothing was real except for the speakers, but they were able to cast a shadow as they walked onto the virtual stage, which I think they were just showing off on their augmented reality technology. But it was pretty impressive, the type of experience they could deliver on.
So let me go to some of the questions we're getting from people. We're getting tons of questions. This is a hot topic, as they say on View and other places. So based on virtual events that you have done since the COVID crisis started, what are the sizes of the crews that put together to pull off a virtual event, especially at a time when people are laying people off and their resources are scarce?
Yeah, so two trends we're seeing there. One, a lot of these newer technologies that I referenced, kind of web-based production tools, weren't exactly being wholeheartedly embraced because AV companies could produce, they were used to producing on site, but this pressure to produce everything remotely totally changed the value proposition of what we needed to produce a virtual experience. So the cost of that and the size of the production team has gone down greatly. That said, as we kind of emerge from total shelter in place, this rise of virtual event venues is definitely something we're seeing. I know even for our own event, those are things we're looking at. So can we have a limited footprint with a stage to produce some of our keynotes, but maybe we still have a lot of our breakouts produced remotely? So you don't need the same thing you would need as a main stage 100-foot screen on site in your keynote room, but you may go to a local sound stage and with 5 of your speakers and a limited crew, and you can do it for a reasonable budget, and also greatly up level that presentation for some of your most important presentations as well. And
don't you think lighting is the most important thing?
Lighting is huge. I've got. I made a $30 investment.
I left mine at my Virginia house. But I think lighting is critical, and it's the cheapest thing to do really well. What are the realistic rates to charge guests for hybrid conferences? Like, what's the range of value?
Yeah. So one, I think it is a little bit about what's the motive for your events, right? If you're a technology company running a user conference, it's pretty clear you're motivated to share the latest on your products and services and developments and looking to build awareness around that. So it's probably not reasonable to charge at all for an event that's ultimately kind of benefiting you on the backside of it. But if you're an association that, that spends a lot of time producing that content, educational materials, providing the CE credits, getting the accreditations, certainly reasonable to do it. Same time, you're not providing roof over people's heads, water, coffee, food, and those types of things. I think to give you a specific number might be a little bit hard, but I just think there's certainly precedence for that kind of $75 all the way up to maybe $250 range, depending on the amount of content that you're able to make available for that virtual audience.
So if you have $1,000 conference and somebody can attend for $100, are you cannibalizing your own sales, which is the big thing that we've always been talking about on this stuff?
Oh yeah. Now there's always that worry. And, I just keep going back to all the types of live event experiences that have embraced that virtual extension. Sports are the greatest example. Their platform is so much more powerful and so much more profitable by extending. And, everyone knows the power of being there face to face. But the power of having a bigger platform from which to kind of broadcast can't be underestimated. And I think if you're able to tap into that and execute on it, then your sponsors are going to want to tap into that as well.
If another thing you talked about, when you watch golf, you wait till the action's really happening. How long should a hybrid conference?
I think it's a mix of on demand and live. I think Salesforce did an interesting approach with their Sydney event. They did pretty quick with a pretty quick turnaround. I think it was in mid-March or early April, where they would have, I think it was roughly 2 hours of live content each day, followed by other content that would be made available on demand later in the day. And that could be just available on consumption whenever you want to tap back into it over the next couple of weeks. So that's where the live versus on demand decision kind of needs to be made. How long can you ask somebody to sit and watch anything? 2-3 hours is probably up there, at least for a contiguous time frame. All back to back.
I seriously doubt that I would sit here and spend 2 or 3 hours just watching one thing without distractions.
I think it's being tested. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of different approaches. It'll be interesting to see what the experiments come back with.
Exactly.
Maybe movie length is a good way to think about it. And yeah, people do get a little stir crazy when you get over that 2 hour mark, certainly when you cross the 3 hour mark.
Especially when the bars start opening again.
Exactly.
How do you like redo your sessions? If you're doing a hybrid event, do you put more time in between the breaks so you can accommodate both? I mean, how do you're juggling, it's a juggling act because you want the hybrid host to have the ability to entertain as well without the pressure of the time of on site.
Right. And I think, again, people at home really want something always, right? They're not going to deal with the 15-minute breaks all that well, or they want something that's going to have that high velocity. What's next? And that's where, I don't really see hybrid as a backup plan for in-person events because it's so centered around what's happening on site. But that means you've got a team on site that's, being able to address those gaps, to talk and provide value. And I like the idea of interviews, of prepackaged on-demand content, of, bringing on thought leaders onto that stage and bringing them on for 5 minutes and having them be able to talk, or a key executive at a top tier sponsor. And that's able to kind of give that dynamism. Okay, let's go check out the next session in the track. Well, we're going to check it out for 15 minutes. Then we're going to bring you back and you're going to hear from this person next. So that's how I would try and bridge the gap, is with that extra team that's guiding your at-home people through that event experience and bridging those gaps.
When you talk about the person that's guiding the experience, that host becomes more important than ever. When I was doing these things at Event Camp back 10 years ago, we experimented a lot with the host. Is the host breaking the fourth wall, or is the host a formal person that is hosting the event, or is he sort of like the guy who wants to go behind the scenes and sees what's in the refrigerator in the back, or looking into the medicine cabinet at a party?
I don't think he's that far behind the scenes, but he's definitely speaking into the camera, right? I think I truly, I speak to some extent at conferences, and I really appreciate the value of a great MC that can really just make a big difference in how you perceive your in-person experience. It's not the same person because that person has to work the room and the audience and the crowd and there. I think it's a totally different set of people. They're the ones that are speaking directly to the audience at home. And maybe, throwing it to the stage when the presentations go live. But I think it's a different kind of MC, so to speak, than it is for your in-person audience.
We've had a big debate at BizBash on whether it's recorded information or whether it's live. And I've done them where I've done a half an hour of recorded information and I can add more visuals to it and it's a cooler, slicker thing. But are people paying attention to recorded more on these virtual hybrid events, or are they wanting to have the what can go wrong piece?
There's a lot of worry over what can go wrong, and I can't not tell you I can't tell you something's not going to go wrong, right? Internet connections. I've been on my fair share of these webinars where a fellow speaker just drops out, and
everybody on the whole 2,000 people signed up have been there.
Certainly, but there's definitely a spectrum. I think there's three options that you always have. You can go purely live. You can go simulated live, where you're actually streaming video at a certain time. So to the unmeticulous viewer, they may not realize it's not actually live.
Yeah.
Or you can go full on demand, right? Where just the user is clicking play whenever they want. So there's three options that you have. One advantage of pure live is you can actually shape your presentation around what the audience is saying. You obviously can't do that with pre-recorded. Now you can come back for question and answer after, but if you want audience engagement throughout and really incorporating some of those live experiences, that's going to be some of the power of live versus the other two, simulated live and pure on demand.
Let's get into some specific types of events. Someone is asking about how do you do hybrid virtual fundraising galas with performances and things like that? Is there a use case for doing that with hybrid?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, there's certain draws to galas. One of them is being seen there. So you can't tap into that same value of community and the kind of being seen at those types of events. The other value a lot of times is the speaker that you bring and the unique content that they can share, whether it's a top diplomat or a celebrity or those types of things. So you can tap into that a little bit. But I think, yeah, it's interesting to try and map hybrid experiences to that. You're starting to think more like an award show. Award shows have had mediocre. They're still popular because they're on broadcast television, but I think there's always complaints about them potentially being a snooze fest. And so how do you keep that going? And nobody's really solved that just yet.
Well, how about can you raise money with hybrid? Is there a technology that can help you get money on demand from people based on the speaker that's talking about an awful illness that touches your heartstrings? And
sure,
you give right away.
Yeah, there's even YouTube Live as a platform has integrated donation functionality around it, and you're seeing more and more of that with the social media networks. As they do have the ability to integrate donations. I think you have to go through some sort of approval process to tap into that, but certainly there's multiple experiences that you can tap into. One is this concept of not semi-live, but simulcasting. And so not only can you kind of have your event experience where your registrants are there, your virtual audience there, but you can expand your reach even further by simulcasting to social media networks. So you might take some pieces of the content and put it out on LinkedIn Live or YouTube Live or Facebook. A lot of different opportunities there so that even those that didn't register or didn't know about your event, but they come across it through social media networks, you have that exposure. And plus you can tap into some of those donation tools that I've seen be highly successful for live experiences. We've seen them with musical artists. I know the Lumineers did a big show, which you can check out on YouTube Live. I think it was related to the COVID crisis and in healthcare, first responder or healthcare professionals, those types of things. But they raised, I want to say it was either $50,000 or $500,000, but all with, kind of integrating the donation experience with the live stream experience as well. So definitely some models for success out there.
Someone is asking about weddings, hybrid weddings.
I've attended one. I got it, and I put on my tux top and shorts.
Are you getting married? Is it yours?
Oh, no. Don't, my girlfriend's over there.
Oh, no.
Let's be quiet about that.
That's a different Zoom.
Exactly. No, but I've attended my fair share of Zoom weddings. Just because, travel hasn't been a possibility, or getting large groups hasn't been a possibility. But, allowing friends and family to participate and kind of see it all go down and maybe put the reception a little bit on hold for another time. I've seen that be quite common. So people can at least join in. And a lot of the people on the webinar or on the Zoom meeting I was with, it was their first Zoom. But, they got to actively participate. And we did a little toast at the end, and that was that.
I'm taking a wine som class on Zoom. It's very interesting, and we're doing lots of testing. The chat is burning up. Have you look at all the chat?
I see it firing through here. It's tough to keep up.
It's tough. I don't know what we've unleashed, but we've unleashed something big. This is a really big topic, and everybody wants to ask you questions. I know our time is about up, but if you want to, based on what you've seen, you want to give a final comment on how you see the future of this. I mean, we're sort of in the Model T stages of this, right? When your product comes out, I think you're going to, I know based on the experience that we've had with Cvent, you've got a lot of firepower, and you've studied this and you've demonstrated that you know what you're talking about. So we can't wait to see the kind of apps and things that you're creating.
Yeah, it's going to spawn a whole new suite of technologies, and everyone's kind of rethinking their role and how they get involved with it. So, one thing we've seen is our planners and our customers have been interacting with people in their organization they've never had interactions with before. So it's a whole new team they're assembling. And with that, a lot of new technologies they're having to get familiar with pretty quickly, to provide something that is a little more engaging and exciting than just bringing together 20 or 30 webinars. Don't get me wrong, webinars are great for kind of 60 minutes of content and share some thoughts, but when you get to that next level of event,
they have to be fun though. I mean, we're getting into even your wedding, so
exactly, gotta add a little fun to it.
We've got a ton of questions. There's even questions about higher education and how we can solve the education process with hybrid events. I mean, there's so many applications. This is so much bigger than just events. I think it's incredible that we are now, as people in the event industry, are in charge of corporate culture. And I think that we're going to be seeing a complete revolution in the value of what event organizers can do, especially when they're partners with senior management. So everybody out there should be partners and be strategic with senior management on how they can evolve their cultures, especially in this new world. So with that, I thank you so much, and we look forward to future events like this. And it was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Guys.